Welcome to another episode of the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast. Today, we are talking about transitions. We are going to unpack what transitions are, different types of transitions, our mindset around transitions, which is really important, and then, of course, some key strategies that we use both as parents and as health providers. So let's get stuck into transitions.
We are child development obsessed, business besties, and mums, and we're here to spill all our secrets.
We have a combined 30 years experience working with children, and each episode we will bring you up-to-date research and evidence-based strategies to set your children up to thrive.
I'm Lizzie Dawson, Australian exercise physiologist.
I'm Emily Mackey, Australian speech pathologist,
And this is the Move, Talk, Thrive podcast.
All right. Hello, we are back.
Hi, welcome back, everyone.
Transitions, it's a goodie, isn't it? From parents' perspective and practitioner clinical.
Yeah, we were saying before we pressed record that life is basically all about transitions. And the more deeply you think about it, you go, actually, everything that children do is a transition. So it's a pretty big topic, but not one I feel like people talk about a lot.
No, I feel like I talk about it a lot because educators talk about it. And I think it's because they are doing so many, like when we were just talking about it earlier, we're talking about transitions in the home from, say, playing outside to the behavior that we're expecting at the dinner table. And I think that is really relevant in an early education space because it's a transition from parent to kindy educator, and it's a transition from you've got home to car to kindy, and you've got inside and outside, and you've got all these complex and like frequent transitions where we're expecting different behaviors from children. And so I think that it's of course it's going to be tricky.
Now that you say that, definitely in the educator circles, transitions are a big thing. In our therapy sessions, like so one-on-one, or if you're like doing a joint session, or if you're even doing a session in an external place, transitions are super important, a key component of the session. But I think in that regard, not spoken about enough if we think about how important they are. And we'll often definitely talk about routines, which is a part of transitions, routine is not the only thing to talk about, though, is it? Like, it's important that we talk about transitions as a whole.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that we understand what it is, what children need during these times of change, even if they're like minuscule change, and maybe identify where the struggles are coming from and perhaps where you might see them more frequently. I know that when we're dealing with complex little kiddies, and we have to, allow a certain amount of time in our clinical session for a transition to finish. Otherwise, we're going over our time all the time.
Yes, you want to stick to time.
Which is, which is pretty important.
Yeah, and the reason why it's good to talk about transitions is because if we get our transitions right, or if we're not doing something well and it's affecting the child, then we can come back, reevaluate, and really at the end of the day, it's get the best result for our child in therapy or in life in general, to being, and supporting them in being a functioning child at school and then into adulthood, because even in adulthood, life is full of transitions. And I think it's something that even adults struggle with, because a transition is basically, it can be the unexpected, and it can be, the unknown. And so we want to help our children. So the reason why we talk about this is because we want our children to know what to expect and be better prepared for things so that they're not afraid of the unknown. And if children are not afraid of the unknown, they feel safe, they feel secure, and that is then going to set them up to have better experiences to learn in therapy, better play, which is then going to open up their mind to learn more. And they're also going to be able to talk about their needs and what they want, and therefore be supported by those around them. So that's what, it looks like in a child, but as an adult as well, it is exactly the same.
Totally. And I mean, we've got more control over what we're doing. Like we're actually choosing to change from one environment to the next or one activity to the next, where, and we have way more predictability in that change, and we still have behaviors. So, like I think it's about adjusting expectation. I think so much of working with kids is about our expectation and making sure that we're setting them up for success. And I think that a lot of the time our expectations are too high. We need to change that.
Or make them realistic to know where the child's at and what we can expect from them. And each child is at a different developmental level. So you have to know your child quite intimately to know how they're going to respond and what's the best way to transition them.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, I guess, because you bring the lovely perspective of working with educators in the preschool setting, and then and also then one-on-one in therapy, but me more so from the therapy environment or just that one-on-one involvement. And transitions are transitions, like they're happening with groups of children and they're also happening one-on-one, but I think the underlying principles are pretty similar no matter what environment you're in,
Yeah.
and how we would think about the transitions.
Yeah.
Correct? Mm.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's about, I mean, first of all, like what is a transition? I think, when you think about, for me, when I think about transitions, it just goes straight to an early learning setting, from taking the kids outside into inside, or a transition or drop off, or yeah, like it's like changing environments, but it can be as simple as changing activities or even changing routines.
Or changing between caregivers. So
Yeah.
change from mum to an educator, or even mum to a grandparent, or mum to dad, mum to, if you're going on a play date, that's a transition.
Yeah.
So
Or
changing
even like
environment.
traveling, right? Like getting in the car. That's a
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah.
And I
So
think that's really important because, I think, and coming back to like knowing your child, like I think there's so much sensory at play, like a sensory input at play when we're talking about transitions, because changing positions, changing environments, all the input that we're taking in is going to change. And one of those that can be quite difficult for children is the car.
mm-hmm. Do you think the car, it's the transition of getting into the car and getting out of the car, or the car is like that serves as the transition for moving activities, like going from home to daycare?
No, I think it's the experience of the car. I think
Mm.
it's like, well, it's if you
Well,
think
it's both,
about
right?
when you're getting your kids into the car, there's so much instruction, isn't there? There's so much that you're asking of them, and you're kind of asking them to do it quickly. Like I'm just thinking about what I do with my kids, which is making me feel bad. But like I'm like, get in the car, put on your seatbelt, and they're all like chatting happily away, but I'm sitting there and I'm ready to go. Like I've transitioned into the car, but they're
Mm.
still doing whatever. I'm not giving them adequate time and space to go through that transition. And then it's like the, sensory of putting on a seatbelt and sitting in the car. And then the car is actually moving. Like
Mm.
that's a big sensory input for them. And a lot of kids struggle with that. You hear about all the babies struggling in cars. Marley, my little one, and he's got some sensory differences. He hated the car,
Mm.
hated it.
Just screamed, right?
Yeah, I just remember driving to Straddie one holidays and he just cried the whole way. And, you know, I think that was really bad, but some people literally don't get in the car because it's so bad.
Oh yeah, heaps of
Um,
mums. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I think the more, the more you see this more frequently, the more complex the child, right?
Mhm. Yeah. And so I guess it's trying to understand what's happening in that situation. Like, is it a sensory thing? Is it a physical thing? depending on how old they are, like their communication, the emotion, looking at what's happening before, look at what's happening during, where you're going to, it's looking at all those different elements to tie it together.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things there, which I can relate to as well, is if I am rushed or like feeling, stressed, or, it's often when you've got a deadline, like time, like get in the car, go, 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 then
Yeah.
that heightens the situation and that makes the transition
Yeah.
terrible. If
Yeah.
I am calm, then the transition is calm.
Oh,
So
co-regulation, it's everything.
yeah, it's really important that we understand our roles as adults or caregivers or therapists to the role that we play in the transition for the child, which is
Mhm.
to be that calming, confident, like I said at the start, safe and secure person to provide
Yeah, it's
that for the
about,
child.
I just think, like when I think about it, and I don't so much think about this as a mother, but when I think about it from a clinical perspective, I'm like, that's what I need to be doing as a mother. And it's about setting them up for success. Like
Yeah,
if
and
I'm asking them
children.
to do something quite complex in a, short period of time when I am overstimulated or dysregulated or whatever, then I'm setting them up to fail.
Mm,
And it's like in a session, if you're doing lots of different exercises and you've got a child that struggles with that, or you're doing lots of new activities, or and you've got a child that struggles with transition, or you're like taking them through till the last couple of minutes of their session, and then the next person is waiting. And for us in our clinic, the next person's waiting and you can see them. It's because we don't go into
mm.
a single room. We're in a more open space. So it's about having strategies in place to set you and them up for success. So because you don't want them to struggle, like that's going to impact everything.
No, no. And that just it heightens all the situation. There is research that talks about children who are more likely to have successful transitions,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's, in whatever the transition is, they're more likely to have a successful transition when they have a strong attachment, like that's attachment theory, or a strong bond with the
Mm-hmm.
person that is, facilitating the transition.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, as a mother, that's why it's so important for mums to be having that really strong attachment and bond with their child,
Mm-hmm.
because it's providing the safety and security. As a therapist, that's why we talk so much about relationship and rapport, and how do we build rapport with our children, and also with the parents, because again, the parents play such a vital role. If the child is forming that strong bond with you and also the parent, then the transition is going to be a lot better in therapy. Or if, say, for example, you maybe put too many transitions in a session, the child's not coping, you're able to salvage it because of that underlying attachment theory that's there, which is children need to have a strong relationship with the person, and they feel
And
supported. That's why.
yeah, that's right. And I think setting children up for transitions, creating, open communication, allowing enough time, having visuals, making it predictable and safe for them is going to contribute to that rapport.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's going to feed into each other. Like if you provide them with enough, like, I don't know, infrastructure, then you're actually going to create an environment where they feel safe.
Mm.
Do you know? And that's going to feed into the rapport, and that's going to feed into the transition, and it's going to feed into your session, because when they feel safe, they're more open to try new things. And when they feel safe, they're going to open up and, you know, share how they're feeling, or,
Mm. Mm. Mm.
this, that, and the
I
other.
think in saying that, like, it is then okay, I guess, as a therapist, if a child comes in and you are struggling with transitions with them, and they are struggling with transitions initially, or not even initially, like you could have been seeing the child for 12 months, but whenever you're instigating a change, you may experience more challenge in challenging behaviors from a child. They might be more uncomfortable or frustrated, or you're not feeling like they're making as much progress and they're going to learn as well as, you know, a goal that you've been working on that's the same, that they're comfortable with. And I think that's knowing, like, to have a bit of grace for yourself as a therapist to go, okay, like, I do need to look at myself. I need to use my critical thinking skills and my clinical reasoning to go, what can I do here to improve myself? Maybe, you know, thinking about how the transitions are being done. But just knowing, like, your child is going to probably present with a bit more challenging behavior if there is, you know, a change that's made that they perceive as major. And that's okay. We've just got to work through it. As long as you've got that relationship with the parent, then that is really critical, because the parent goes, okay, I'm willing to see this through.
Yeah.
But just normalizing that, because I feel like I was seeing children for a very long time and I thought I knew them in and out and they were super predictable. And just because I knew them, and they'd still throw a curveball for me, like after 3 years, and I was like, why? What's happening? But it's just change.
And I think, you know how they say children behave the worst with their mum because they feel safe. So I think, and I'm not sure that that's
You've seen
always
that.
the case. Like, but if you've got a really good relationship with them, one, you're going to know your expectations are going to be a little bit more aligned. If you've got a good relationship with their mum, or their parents, I should say, you're going to be able to communicate those expectations a little easier. And then if you've been working with them for a while, you may be seeing them feeling safe to express themselves and what they're feeling as well. So I think that's another
Mm.
element to consider.
It might be, it's a positive thing then. You spin it
Yeah, that's what
positively.
I tell myself when my kids are really being
I think
horrendous.
it's really true though. Like, children will be at school and they'll be, you know, really well behaved, and they come home and have major meltdowns. But that's
Yeah,
because they've been holding things on the inside all day, and that's okay, because they're still
yeah,
learning at school.
yeah.
Um,
And remember, that's a transition too.
yeah, it is. Everything is a transition. Let's talk about maybe some of the common, like I just said, you know, as a clinician, you need to sort of use your critical thinking to think about, what have I done that's not being supportive of this transition. So
Mm-hmm.
a few things that come to my mind is, you may have had a high number of transitions in a too high number of transitions in a short period of time. So
Yeah.
therapy sessions, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, 60 minutes. Each child is different, right? But children will only cope with so many changes and so many transitions. So whether that's a new game or a new goal or a new activity, or it's transitioning from the floor to the table, or going outside and inside, like more water-based activity to a paper activity, you know, you might have too many transitions in there. So it's looking at your stimulus, what you're using, your environment around you, looking at your physical positioning, like you said before, and going, okay, is my child someone who needs a higher number? If not, maybe I've had too many. And then because of that, sometimes transitions can be too rushed, which will bring challenging behavior out in your child. If they're rushed, then they probably don't know what is coming next, or they don't know what to expect.
Yeah, no
So,
predictability.
yeah, if they've got very little warning of what's expected of them, then you might be perceiving them as not as presenting challenging behaviors, because they're not knowing what to do in that time. And maybe children are not ready to stop what they were doing before, which is what you were saying with the car. So then, because of that, they're going to show some challenging behaviors, which that is, you know, the challenging behaviors I'm talking about, that's unique to each child, how they respond. It could also be, I guess, in the educator setting, if you're with a group of children, or if you're running small groups or intensives and you're trying to transition the children all in one way, I guess, you know, that I know it's like not practical to have individual transitions for each child in a group setting, but maybe it might be looking at, I don't know, some sort of different, maybe two different strategies to transition children instead of
Yeah.
one
Yeah,
together, the
I
whole
think
together.
in a group, and I talk about this all the time because I'm working within so many kindies, and it's interesting because they're getting allied health professionals to go into kindergartens to help educators, but allied health professionals traditionally work in a one-on-one environment.
Mm,
I fortunately have been working in kindies for 14 years, so I feel like I'm really good with that group
mm,
environment. I bring that perspective, and I've actually got more experience in the group environment than I do in one-on-one with
mm,
children.
mm,
So I feel like I can bring that perspective in. It's really hard when you've got some complex behaviors because we're talking about co-regulation, right? Like we're talking about ourselves co-regulating. When you're dealing with a group of kids, they're all co-regulating as well. So if you've got one child that is having this outburst and this, big response,
mm.
then that can be contagious to whoever is kind of sensitive to that in the group. So I think in terms of transitions in that sort of situation, and unfortunately, it won't necessarily be one kid having the big emotional outburst, and whether it's that it's contagious or it's a few children that really struggle with transitions, I think there needs to be some strategies. And some of those I find is having, and the other thing that we find is that what works one day won't work the next day. So it's about having that toolkit, which what you're saying is having a couple of options.
Mm.
But I find that if they've got like a safe corner in their room that you can take that child, and quite often we see children struggle from going from outside to inside because the sensory, it's louder, it's brighter, and it's artificial light. There's busyness in terms of the room, so visual input is so much higher. So I think it's about doing it effectively to again set everyone up for success. So is it that a child that's maybe struggling with that transition is gone in and got settled like 2 minutes before? So it's not like you have to do an individual plan, but just 2 minutes
Mm.
before they go in, and you've got a little safe corner for them, which has got 2 or 3 activities that are their go-tos that you go in, you get them set up with that, and then transition the rest of the kids. But I think this is relevant in groups, particularly
Yeah.
groups with complex needs.
And I think you have to consider those types of strategies because you've got complex needs. And that's, if you do try to just do one strategy, that's where you're going to have issues or find it very challenging as
Yeah.
an educator, or even if you're running intensive small groups in your practice, in your therapy. Over school holidays, people will tend to do lots of groups. You do need to have a few up your sleeve. And I think sometimes people think, oh no, like I have to have control of the children. And so they have to be doing everything all together and everything at the same time, because that is showing that I've got things under wraps, like I've got control of the group. And it's actually just letting that go and going, no, like I don't perceive control of the group that way. I have to
Yeah.
be like, okay, so a little bit more flexible. And I have to
Yeah.
say, okay, so you can eat your lunch here, separate to here, and you can come in earlier. So it's like if we set hard rules in our minds, that can be what sets us up to fail sometimes. So it's being really aware of that and not thinking it's a reflection on you as not having control of a group, because I think a lot of allied health professionals, they like to like, especially speeches, it's like I've got control of the group, I know everything's under wraps, everything's okay. And it's the same thing if you like with the co-regulation, it's more likely that you're going to have to deal with behaviors in a group setting, right? Because if a child is affecting another child, so it's just going, okay, if that's happening, that's okay, I
Yeah.
can do this and not
Yeah.
focus on making the group perfect or
Yeah,
without issue,
totally. I
without issue.
quite often say if you've got a group of, I don't know, 20 kids, and how big would your group be in a holiday
Oh no,
program?
if we've only got
8?
one clinician, like 4 or 5 kids. We've got
Yeah.
two clinicians, maybe 6 or 7. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we really like the intensives to be about 4 kids.
But that's 4 kids with complex needs.
Yeah, they're all
Right?
coming to speech
Yeah.
therapy for a reason. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then I say in a kindy group, you've got 20 kids and you've got 1 in 5 that are developmentally vulnerable. That's the statistics. And it's
Mhm.
probably higher than that. And it's definitely higher than that in certain areas and groups by chance. So I'm like, well, you've got a group of 4 kids in 20 that have got complex needs that are struggling. Like, we need to adjust our expectations here. We're not going to be able to come in and get them all listening and getting them all to follow instructions and get them all, like you need to be able to, you need to be flexible in how this is going to play out, and then have your strategies, and you've all got to be, you got to have all hands on deck.
Yes. That's why they have ratios in childcare centres, right? Because it's just unrealistic to think that you can cope. And I mean, I don't know how teachers do it. I take my hat off to them. Like, even when kids are in kindy, that's really full on to be one teacher to 30 children.
So
Um,
struggle.
I
I can
really
tell.
take my hat off to kindergarten teachers out there. If you're listening, you are superheroes, or any
Yeah.
teachers, really. Um,
Please don't leave. Yeah, because the problem they're leaving because it's so hard. But it's
yeah.
hard. Like, I go out, they're not even getting a lunch break. They're like that. Their lunch
Mm.
break is sitting there with the kids, and these kids don't want to sit down and eat their meals. So it is really hard. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's another episode.
The educators out there, they're amazing.
They are
Um,
superheroes. Yeah.
I think the other thing to think about if we're looking at transitions for our children, right, is we're looking at, so we've been really speaking about the everyday transitions, haven't we? So, like moving from inside to outside the car, those types of things, they happen on multiple times per day. There's also then major transitions as well. So you've got your everyday ones and major ones. So major would be moving house, starting
Mm-hmm.
kindy, that's a major transition.
School.
Um, yeah, school, a change in your family. So, if your grandparents used to live with you and they don't now, or a grandparent passes away, or a family separation. Any other major transitions? Maybe
Oh,
surgery or hospital. If you've got something like say the child breaks their leg and they can't walk for 6 to 8 weeks, it's a pretty big
yeah.
transition.
Even like moving house. Did you say moving
Yeah, so
house?
moving house, yeah. But so you've got to also look at, so transitions are everyday transitions, and that's generally within, so if you're at home, within the home environment, or if you're at the center, in the center, or in the therapy space, and then also major transitions. So I think it's good to be always speaking to our parents, um, and going, okay, so how, if we're noticing some challenging behaviors, have we had any major transitions lately? I always write those
Mm.
things down in my progress notes. We take that as part of our case history and our assessments.
Yeah.
And then I look
Yeah,
at,
that's a
because
good
generally
one.
the major transitions affect the everyday transitions. And the major transitions, because we've got this co-regulation, is because often the parents are a little bit frazzled. So that goes onto the children. But it's then looking at that as a therapist and going, okay, so how can I make today's session a little bit easier if we've had some major transitions going on? Because I need to still achieve my goals with my child, but I need to be flexible. I need to be understanding and know that they may not be coming as prepped and primed as they normally are because they've been having this external environmental transitions.
Yeah, totally. And then I think the other thing that I kind of feel like I say all the time is that we don't need to change our therapy every week. Like, it doesn't need to be a completely different session. Like, they don't need variety like adults need variety. They actually need consistency. Children need predictability because they don't have control over what they're doing. And particularly if there is a big transition, predictability is going to create safety and security. And that's where they're going to reach their potential and thrive more. We know that they're going to thrive when they feel safe and connected. So I quite often will say, do quite similar sessions each week and then just change one exercise a
Mm-hmm.
week. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually say that for rehab in adults as well, because then we can actually, if they have a flare up in their back, just say, then we know what we've changed. Whereas if we're changing the whole session all the time, then we don't actually know what's flaring it up. So I think, and that, I mean, it's the same sort of principle, isn't it? Like, if we're changing everything and then they have this big outburst, we don't actually know what it is. Whereas if we keep it fairly routined, which is sometimes not practical. Again, it's that flexibility, isn't it? But if we can keep it fairly similar, particularly for a child that struggles with transitions, and then change up, something and then finish with the same thing each time. Like I think routine is really big in pediatric care.
Absolutely. Routine is essential. And that looks like I fully support, like, agree with everything you said, because we really try to make sure that, our therapists stay consistent for the child. So the teacher is the same. We try to make sure that the room that they stay in is the same. And that's why I find
Yeah.
it difficult with mobile therapy or therapists that don't have a room and they sort of just go wherever, because it's really changing too much for the child. So each of our
Mhm.
therapists has their own space, or the child goes to the same space every time. The child knows where all the toys are in the cupboard. They sort of start to memorize it, so they know what game they want. So,
Yep.
they know where their parent sits in the room. They know where the activities are. Well, for some children, if it's appropriate, we'll have a schedule with pictures where they can have some autonomy,
Yes.
choose the games that they
Yep.
want. That's not
I do
always
that
important,
too.
having a visual timetable. It is very helpful for lots of children, but sometimes not helpful for other children. So you've got to be flexible
Yep.
on the timetable.
Yep.
Having the different types of pictures. So whether you're having photos versus drawings, those types of things. Um, Whether you've got pictures for the transitions, or whether it's just the games, whether you're using for speeches, whether we're using movement in our sessions to transition our children and help them.
Yeah, we
So
do
there's
that as well.
lots of things in there, but I think what you can, if you can, think about what are the simplest things, make it simple that I can keep the same, so that I can change the thing that needs to be changed, the most important thing, which is the goals. Or and what I like what you said, Lizzie, was things can be similar. So often I find with speeches, and this is what I teach in the PLA, is that they'll go, okay, today I'm teaching big and little, and then tomorrow or next week, then we're gonna jump to wet and dry, and the week after that we're gonna do same and different. Some children that can work, but I'm like, no, for an analytical language learner, we need to actually, it's okay to stay on the goal of wet and dry, to know all of our little micro step ups and then step downs. And I
Mm.
might stay on wet and dry for like 4 to 5 weeks. It's
Mhm.
always different because I'm always challenging the child to step up. But if you're feeling like that as a therapist, like I need to change the goal every single time, I question you to think about your clinical skills, to whether you've
Mhm.
actually got enough clinical competencies to know all of the ins and outs of the goal to make sure your child achieves it to 100%.
Yeah.
Again, there are some children that achieve your goal really quickly in one session, but for the most part, yes, the sessions are very consistent and stable. And it's because it takes children a little bit of time to learn, and that's okay. But as a clinician,
Well, they
particularly a
need
new grad,
repetition.
yeah, yes, they do. But as a new grad, just don't feel that pressure from,
Mm.
I think we mostly put it on ourselves to be
Mhm.
like, I've got to change it. I've got to keep it like all different, because that's not what parents are thinking. That's not what the child needs. You just need to be very good at knowing your little micro goals in there for your therapy. So keep it simple. Keep it simple to help your transitions. And I think, talking to the families, talking to the parents, you may need to educate your parents. I think we've spoken about this in another episode, but educating your parents on what to do before the session and what to do
Yeah.
potentially after the session to help with the transition in and out of therapy. And then I guess making sure the child is settled coming into the therapy room with you, because the parent has had a bit of a transition period before coming into the clinic or the therapy room with you. So I think there's a lot of other things that you can talk about, but it's, in terms of, how do you use toys and how do you use pictures and movement and really nitty gritty specific things. But I feel like that's probably what we more go into more in our courses and in the in-depth learning. But for now, that's just a very brief overview of transitions. There's a lot to talk about with it, but yeah, talking to your parents, making sure you're thinking about your transitions with your child, looking at what's happening underneath the behavior or any challenging behavior that you are seeing, making sure you have an established, predictable routine for the most part with your children. And being flexible with them and knowing why we have transitions, routine, why they're important, and how we can educate our parents about that as well. All right. So we hope that this has really been insightful and informative for you. We hope that this has inspired you to think a little bit more about your therapy sessions or when you're going into education settings and how you're talking to parents and what you're doing with your children to get the best out of them and work with them from a holistic perspective. Until next time, stay tuned.